All right, guys, welcome. It's good to have you here. I'm just waiting for everybody to fill in who wants to watch, but hopefully this thing's working all right. I have been working all week to get live streaming set up, and I was really surprised at how much work it took to get it to look okay and sound okay. So we'll see from the chat here what everybody's saying. Is it looking all right? Can you guys hear me okay? Everything looking good? No idea, but we'll find out. And if it doesn't look good today, I'll keep, I guess you could say, optimizing it until it does get good. So anyway, today I'm going to be talking about a few different things. Number one, I'm going to talk about creative ruts and motivation for landscape photography. And this is something that I think we all have trouble with. I know I do personally. So I kind of define a creative rut as something where, like, here's the situation. Let's say you're working on a creative project, right? And this is what happens to me. I'll work on it day after day and I'll be really motivated at first. And maybe like a month or a month and a half into the project, I will start to feel kind of the motivation starting to fade away. So like the start of the week, I'll feel motivated, and then day by day, I get less and less motivated until I just wake up one morning and I'm like, man, I don't feel like working on any of this stuff at all today. And that's what I define as a creative rut. So back in the day, I used to kind of just let my mind just take over at that point and wait for the creative rut to pass. Sometimes it would, sometimes it wouldn't. Sometimes it would take a long period of time. Sometimes it would pass pretty quickly. But over the last decade or so of creating images and kind of pushing myself, I have found ways to bypass the creative ruts a lot quicker and stay motivated on things that I really want to work on. So that's the first thing that I'm going to be talking about today, and I'll give you guys some tips for that stuff. And then I also have some questions from you guys that you have submitted under the videos over the past week, and I will be covering those as well. So if you guys like this, just give a thumbs up under the video. I'm going to be doing these every Sunday that I'm home. So if there's a good reaction, I'm happy to keep doing them. I love sitting down and talking to you guys. And the fun part about live streaming is now that I have it set up, I can just push a button and it'll roll and I don't have to do any editing. So I'll still release my regular videos during the week, but I thought it would be fun to just pick a topic, sit down and riff on it over live stream once in a while. So you guys got to let me in the comments and the chat. Let me know if you enjoy this. If it's something you want me to keep doing, make sure to subscribe. And even more helpful, you guys can share this with your friends that you think might find it useful as well. And another way you can support me and help me reach more photographers is sign up for my email list. And on my email list, I send out lots of good material. I never spam you guys. I never send you out junk. And you also get all of my free camera technique PDFs. So I will leave a link for that email list down below. And I don't trap your email address. You can unsubscribe at any time if you don't like it. And you never have to hear from me via email again. So now that we got that out of the way, let's start talking about creative ruts. And before we do, let me jump on here to make sure everything sounds good and everything's rolling. I have this thing in the back of my head while I'm talking that the live stream's just going to cut out. And then I'll just be talking for half an hour to nobody. And there'll be a bunch of angry people. So looks like it's rolling. Looks like it's working great. Awesome. Let's do it. So creative ruts. When I'm looking at projects and stuff that I want to produce in my life, and I define a project as anything that has multiple steps, and you have this idea in your head and you're like, well, I want to accomplish this idea. How do I get there? That's what I see as a project. It's just the tasks that get you from where you are to where you're trying to go. So whenever I'm doing a project, no matter what that project is, I have this place I'm trying to go that I've dreamed up in my head. And I know that during that project, no matter what, I will hit some sort of creative rut where I will lose motivation, I will lose train of thought, and I just won't feel like working on the project. But what I've noticed since I've determined that this will always happen with every creative project is there are two things that guarantee that I will get in a creative rut. So the number one thing, which I have designed out of my process now, but if you don't have, or if I don't have, I should say, a clear vision of the outcome in mind at the end of the project that's going to motivate me, then I'm definitely going to get in creative ruts sooner. And the reason for this is let's say you're working on stuff. Let's say you just want to get better photos, but you don't have this outcome in mind or this vision in mind of this place that you want to get to or the result that you want. Well, when you're working on every day at getting better photos, then without this vision in your head that motivates you, as soon as you don't feel like doing that project one day, you just won't do it. And there won't be this high level motivation out in the distance to push you on, because every single project that I've ever done, creative or anything else, at some point in that project, I lose motivation. But if I can remember and visualize what my long-term outcome of that project is, then that will re-motivate me, because no matter how exciting the stuff you're working on is, it's going to have boring parts to it that are just going to take time and effort, but might not be the most enjoyable thing to do. For example, this live streaming project, my goal was to be able to just turn on a video and talk to you guys and get ideas out there and teach people without any editing or without any other interaction. But along the way, it was fun to get a camera for this. It was fun to get the lighting, but getting all the little software and stuff set up, that was boring. And if I didn't have this outcome in the far future of where I wanted to get, and I couldn't pull that up in my brain when I kind of lost motivation, then I just would have stopped. It wouldn't have been possible for me to keep going. So I think if you want to kind of sidestep your creative ruts, have a project in place, but every time you design these projects, really visualize where you want to take that project and where you want it to go, and kind of just visualize it in your mind to the point that you can kind of play a movie in your mind of what you want it to look like. So a good example of this is when I first got into landscape photography, I didn't do backpacking, right? So I wanted to go backpacking and take photos. So my goal was to go out in the wilderness and do these awesome expeditions where I was out there by myself finding my own images and being able to sustain and take care of myself for 10 or 15 days with just my gear and my food on my back. Well, when I started this, I could envision that in my mind and how fun that would be in the photos that would come out of it. But I didn't have any idea how to get from where I started to that place that I envisioned in my mind. So the first thing I like to do here is read over this thing every morning. So when I have projects that I'm working on, I label the project as the outcome that I'm actually going for, and I describe it very clearly. And every day when I'm working on that project, even though it's annoying at times, I will read that description, and then I just close my eyes, and I actually envision like a highlight movie roll in my brain. And whenever I'm doing that, I never envision the bad things that could possibly happen. I only force myself to envision the best possible scenario if I couldn't fail, if everything went perfectly. And you'll notice when you start doing this for things that you're excited about, that you actually get energy and you get motivation, and you're like, oh man, this is going to be fun to work on this project today. So even if the next step in that project is something that's really boring to work on, if every time before you work on it, you force yourself to paint this mental picture, close your eyes, take 2 minutes, and just make sure your whole body can feel it. Because once your brain visualizes it and you do it for long enough, then your whole body will start to feel what it might feel like when you get that final result. So you can almost trick your physiology, your brain, your body, and everything else to get in line with what you're trying to do. But if you don't have that vision painted in your mind or that highlight reel painted for yourself, then it's going to be really hard to stay motivated when you hit little creative ruts in that project that are boring or you don't feel like working on them. So I like to have these frameworks in place that'll kind of keep me in line and make sure I stay motivated. The second part of this is, if you want to be a prolific creator, meaning you want to work on stuff that you care about and you want to do it long term, I think there's 2 things that come into play. Number one is that you have to trust in yourself to be able to do it, and you can learn along the way. You can get teachers to help you. When you're not an expert, you can reach out to people and have them help you out. But if you have the trust in yourself that says, I'm going to finish this and I'm going to do it no matter what, I'm going to find a way to do it, then you can basically push through anything. And when you get up in the morning and you're in a creative rut, you just have to say, well, I know what I'm going to do. I know the next steps in this thing. By having clearly defined steps, I'm just going to start moving down the path to that vision that I have in my head of where I want to go. So I used to make this mistake all the time. I would feel like I was in a creative rut and I wouldn't be motivated, so I wouldn't work on what I was trying to get accomplished. But what I found is that even if you don't feel motivated at the start of the day, if you just work on the thing for 15 or half an hour, 15 minutes or half an hour, then you will start just to get some energy and some motivation. So the combination of those few things has pushed me through almost all my projects. And I just think that it's always going to happen no matter what in your life. But if you let your mind control what you do in your life and you fall into creative ruts and you say, well, I'm just going to wait for the inspiration to hit again, then you're going to spend a lot of your life just waiting for inspiration to hit, and you're never going to get the creative stuff that you actually want to done. So that's the first part of creative ruts, is have this vision in mind, this place you want to go, visualize the highlight reel every time you're about to work on the project, and then don't listen to your brain when you don't feel motivated. Just get up and work on the thing no matter what. And over time, you will have this ability to rely on yourself, and you will trust in yourself to know you'll create the project even when you don't feel like it that day. And by having that trust in yourself, it kind of just builds a streak, and the motivation builds and builds and builds. And then you just know that you'll be able to create these projects, and you also know that you're always going to hit these creative ruts along the way. So that's the first thing. Let me do a quick check-in to make sure you guys are all still here. Oh yeah, you're all still here. That's great. And then I'm going to take a sip of coffee too. So that's the first part of the creative rut aspect. Now, the second part can be really tricky, but sometimes when I feel creative ruts coming on, it's because I'm actually mentally and physically burnt out. And this happens to me a lot too, because I like to be constantly working on something and challenging myself. I like the feel of it. I somewhat think it's probably an addiction to a point, which who knows if that's good or bad. But burnout is something that can take place when you've just not given your mind or your body enough time to rest. So oftentimes when I'm working on these projects, and maybe you guys feel like this too, I'm sure a lot of you probably do, right? You're working on this project that you're really into for, I don't know, a few weeks, whatever you want to call it, a set amount of time. And you start to notice that the ideas just aren't flowing on the project. You're starting to feel like all of it's just becoming like this mess in your head where you can't really organize where you want to go inside your mind. It just gets confusing and you feel like you don't have any good new ideas on how to drive the project forward. That's how I feel in my head sometimes. And a lot of times that just means that I need a break from the project because I'm getting mentally or physically burnt out and I'm not able to assess it clearly. And when I feel that, I can kind of decipher that between just the first step that we were just talking about not having the motivation on the day-to-day. But when I'm starting to hit burnout, a lot of the signs are the same, right? I'll just feel more and more sluggish or less motivated day by day until I just hit a wall and I'm like, man, I'm actually burnt out at this point. And usually I can tell that it's burnout and not just lack of motivation for the project, because I won't have any motivation to do anything in life when I hit burnout. And I think a lot of this is the combination of mental burnout and physical burnout, because I like to just redline it and get after it every day. And I don't do a good job at taking days off. And I'm fine with that, but I always know that I'm going to hit this burnout wall and I'm going to need to take just like a week to rest and do nothing. And I find taking that time off to rest is mentally excruciating. Like, I start to go crazy when I take those breaks, but I also know that I have to do it to clearly think about the project in the future. So I think burnout's going to always happen to you. You could try to make, depending on like how you operate personally, you could try to make rest time in your schedule and fit it in there. But I found the best way for me to go is just redline it until I hit a complete burnout wall, rest for a week or two, and then redline it again. I've tried the other ways, like taking weekends off and stuff like that, but it just doesn't work for me. So I think it's a real person-to-person thing on how the burnout aspect works. But whenever I'm looking at burnout, I just prepare that into my schedule. And what I'll usually do is I'll work on other things that I needed to get done in my life, but I kind of just left on standby while I was working on my projects. So this could be things like just getting odds and ends done around my house, getting gear cleaned up from trips that I didn't repair or clean up. Just things that don't take a lot of mental cognition or thinking that I kind of just let go on the back burner while I'm really into creative projects. And just by having kind of a flow of what I'm working on, having an outline of all my projects, having that kind of a highlight reel in my head, and then having these other projects that I can work on when I'm burnt out while I recover has helped me a whole lot. So hopefully that stuff helps you guys out. I have a lot more of these techniques that I use, and if you guys like this kind of talk, leave me a like under the video, let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to talk on this stuff more, because I think that there's a lot of good content on YouTube around creating photos, but I haven't heard many people talk about the things that actually happen in your mind or on the day-to-day when you're creating. Maybe somebody does, but I think a lot of that stuff's lacking, and maybe because it's just hard to clarify when talking about it. So hopefully I'm being clear when I talk about it. I'm sure I could do better, but trying my best to put what I feel when I'm creating out there, so you guys will know that everybody just goes through this stuff. An awesome book that covers a lot of this mindset, and it's a bit different than what I've been talking about here, but The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is an awesome book on the subject, and that's one of my favorite books. Another book that's great for learning how to work, and it could be creative task or deep thinking task, is the book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. So that's a good one as well. But that's my riff for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And right now I'm going to answer some of your questions. So let's go here. What do we got? All right. There's the Q&A for the week. Got them written down. Let's see if you guys are all still here. Cool. Yeah, everybody's still here. You guys having fun so far? How's your Sunday going? Or it might be Saturday or Monday, depending on where you live in the world. I'll scan through some of these live chat questions at the end, and I'll pick out a few to answer as well. But I picked some of these questions from the videos. So if you guys have questions in the future, just leave them under my videos. And I'll pick out some favorable ones that I feel like could give good potential learning out here on the live streams. All right. So this question is from Bradley Joyce Photography. Let me get a drink first. My mouth's dry. Talking way too much. One of my biggest problems. All right. So Bradley Joyce Photography says, how much does your loaded pack weigh, and what percentage of that is camera gear versus backpacking gear versus food? All right, good question. So I actually have a cool little application for this. Let me load it up here, make sure it's working. I'm going to cut over to this, and we can take a look at it. So this is a website called lighterpack.com, and if you're nuts and you want to see all the weights of your stuff, you can get a scale, and you can weigh out each piece of equipment and see how much it weighs, and then you can add it up into pack weight. Now, mostly this is used for backpackers and thru hikers, but it can be used for anybody that wants to really learn to visualize where all their weight is sitting in their pack and reduce it. So for wilderness photography and backpacking, this is essential for me, because if I can cut a few ounces in weight off of my pack, then it's a lot less work I have to do. I don't have to burn as many calories during the day. I can push my trips longer and a bunch of other stuff, because you get about 1.5 pounds of food per day. So each day of food that I carry out in the backcountry with me weighs about 1.5 pounds. So if you can shave a few pounds off your pack weight of non-food items, things you don't need or don't have to have, then you can add extra days to your trip length, or you can just have a lighter pack. So both are great. So we can take a look at this. The first thing I have here is all the categories, right? And I haven't turned on food or supplements in this yet. So I can later turn on food and you can see the total weight. But this is what's called base weight from backpackers or thru hikers, right? Base weight is all of your equipment, including what you're wearing, but it doesn't include the food that you're going to be taking out on the trail with you. And that's a good way to sense what your pack's actually going to weigh. And then food, you always know about 1.5 pounds per day, or you can weigh your food out before each trip. So when I'm looking at this, you can see my base weight is 31.49 pounds. And if I were to shave off my photography gear, which is 3 pounds for my mirrorless setup and 4.87 pounds for my other gear, that just includes lenses. Most weight is the tripod. It's like 3.5 or 4 pounds. And then some other stuff like batteries. Then if I didn't carry my camera gear, I could also shave off this battery, bricks, and charging equipment right here, which is another 1.82 pounds. So I would be down near, 20-ish, 23-ish pounds if I shave that stuff off, which is a pretty light pack in general. So when we look at this, you can see the percentages here, right? You can see that the camera equipment and basically my essential photography equipment or my essential backpacking equipment take up most of the load here. But you guys are welcome to just look at this. And then if you guys want to use this on your own, you just type in all your gear, you weigh it out, and the nice part is you can turn on and off the quantity. So for example, whenever I'm about to go on my trip, I just come down here to food. I have it at 1.6 pounds per day. That includes coffee. And then I just put this on the number of days of the trip. So I usually do 10 to 15 day trips. And I'll turn on a ounce of CBD as well. Man, if you guys do backpacking, CBD oil is fantastic for all endurance sports. CBD is derived from the cannabis plant, but it's not psychoactive, meaning it won't make you high. But what it does do is it reduces inflammation, and it helps you to feel really good, especially in long days on the trail. And since I ever started taking this stuff, it's probably been like a year and a half now or something like that, but I take it for long distance endurance training. I train for ultra marathons, like 50K to, 65, 70K I'm going to do this summer of running in the mountains. And that stuff can really help keep inflammation down while you're getting after it every day. It just makes you feel way better. So I love that stuff, but that's a side rant. So when I add my food into this, you can see that it's added 16 pounds of food here. So the nice part about food weight is as your trip progresses, then your food weight drops. And sometimes if I'm going to go out on like a 15-day trip where I'm out in the backcountry for 15 days, I will find a spot, I'll hike in maybe a day or two, and then I'll base camp for 2 or 3 days, and I'll have all my food at that base camp. And then I can search around and do day hikes in that base camp area while I eat some of that food the first few days. And then if I wanted to get it into more exposed or sketchier terrain, then I'm not doing it with a 50-pound pack because I've eaten like 5 or 6 pounds of my food weight down. So if you're doing really long trips, there's little techniques and tools like this that you can slowly figure out how to do them well. But 16 pounds is a lot of food to carry around. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. You can just look at these. If you want the actual percentages, you could just calculate them. But you can see food is most of my weight, then essential equipment, and then camera equipment. That's my 3 things that weigh the most. What else do we have here? Let's switch back to this other view. I'm learning all this live stream stuff, so hopefully it's running smoothly for you guys. Are you guys all still there? What's going on, guys? Lots of questions in the chat. I'll try to answer some of these near the end too, or at least pick a few out. So let's go back over to questions here. All right. So here's a question from Gabrielle C. It says, did you build your own website or did you use a tool like Squarespace? I know this a little off topic from photography, but I like how you have the approach of not ever being tied to a platform that could decide to hold you back in any way. Love the content in your website. Well, that's a great question, Gabrielle. And thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad you like the website. It's been a decade-long project at this point. So websites, let's talk about this real quick because there's lots of different ways that you could go about it. And it's going to really differ depending on the outcome that you're looking for. So if you want to be a professional photographer in the way that you make money, I would say don't use like Squarespace, don't use Wix, don't use any cheap website builders, because they're going to work for you just fine at first, but they have a very hard time scaling up to lots of traffic, and you don't have the ability to have a developer develop out some solution in the future if you want to expand your audience, if you want to expand what your website can do and a bunch of other stuff. But if you just want to do it for a hobby, use something like Squarespace or Wix, because you can probably figure it out on your own, but they're very limited in what they can do. And the problem with like Squarespace or Wix is if you start to get a lot of traffic in the future, you can't buy really high quality servers for those platforms. But if you use something like WordPress, that's what I use to design all my blogs and my websites. Something like WordPress is going to be able to allow you to constantly upgrade and move as you get more traffic and as you want to scale your website in the future. And you can also buy more and more expensive servers for WordPress. So a server is just what holds all your data. It's like a hard drive that sits somewhere off in the cloud. And when somebody visits your website, this is just layman's terms, right? They're sent to this hard drive that holds all the information and they're sent back. So if you've ever been on a website that's really slow and clunky, some of that is the coding and some of it's also cheap servers. So if you have a lot of traffic on your website, or you're going to have large spikes of traffic, meaning like thousands of people coming at a time, if you have cheap servers, it'll crash the website. But WordPress, you can select the servers you want and you can upgrade them over time while keeping the exact same look and feel of your website. So that's what I use. But if you're just doing it for a hobby, then just use something like Wix or Squarespace, and then you're all set. It's a lot easier to do. But if you think your hobby might morph into professional money-making potential in the future, or you just like designing websites, then use WordPress. There's probably lots of other stuff out there, but that's what I like to use because a lot of the internet runs on WordPress. So it's very easy for developers. I mean, you can hire somebody to help you out with it, or you can just learn it yourself with some basic coding if you'd like to. So that's a little background on that. As far as the photo part of my website, so if you go to photos.davemorrowphotography.com, all my photo portfolio is built on SmugMug, and SmugMug's fine. It's maybe a little bit better than average for hosting photos. If you want a really top level photo portfolio, you can check out Wide Range Galleries. Jack Brower is a landscape photographer. You guys can check out his work. He's a really good landscape photographer, but he is a developer and he also runs this company, Wide Range Galleries, but it's really expensive. Maybe if you wanted to print or something like that, you could use Wide Range Galleries, but just do some research on your own, see what fits for you. But that's a pretty short answer to that. But I always just like to have the ability to expand in the future, and that's why I use WordPress. But at first, when you use WordPress, it's going to be super confusing because it's a pretty technical platform, but you can still start out using it for very cheap. And the only expense is really your domain name and your servers. So at first, when you don't have much traffic, servers can be cheap, like $6 a month. But once you start to see intermediate or high level traffic, it might cost you a few $100 a month. Like my current servers I use for WordPress is WP Engine, and currently it costs about $1,500 a year, and that just scales up with the amount of traffic that you have. So if you have that much traffic, you should be also making an income, so you can kind of counterbalance it. All right, let's see what else we got in here as far as questions go. I'm actually going to answer some live stream questions here. What do we got here? All right, so here's a question. It's called the Nature Nut Project. This is a question from Ashley. How did you start route finding and backpacking off trail? Oh, that's a good question. Well, depends on your skill level and depends how fit you are, because I'll tell you one thing, if you get tired hiking on trails, then going off trail is going to absolutely wreck you and your body's not going to be ready for it. But if you're hiking long days on trail and you want to push yourself into off-trail environments, I guess there's a few things to keep in mind. Number one, you need to be very, very good at navigating in off-trail environments, because it's easy to think you're good at navigating when you're always following a trail and you can look at your GPS and be like, oh, here I am. And then you can look at a map and be like, oh yeah, there I am. I know how to navigate. But when you get into large off-trail environments, especially in places like deserts where there's no big mountain peaks and everything looks the same, then you can get yourself into a lot of trouble very quickly. So here's what I did. When I first wanted to start doing off-trail adventures, I would go to an area that I knew I could easily find my way out of without an actual trip going on. And I would just take my GPS. I use Gaia GPS. You can check it out online. It's just a subscription. You can put it on your phone and you can do the planning on your desktop. But using Gaia GPS, I would design a little route I wanted to take off trail in an area that was close to an actual trail. And then I would go practice to make sure I could actually navigate in that area. And it makes sure that you can actually find your way back to a trail easily before pushing yourself into these trips where you could legitimately get lost and either have to SOS for help or get hurt or something else like that. So if you're going to off trail, or even if you're just backpacking and you are going to push trips out where you're by yourself or with a few friends, having a Garmin InReach Mini, it's an SOS device, but you can also text out if you need help. So it's a two-way text you can pay a subscription for. It gives you up-to-date weather, which is extremely important when off-trailing. If you're off-trailing somewhere that you need good visibility, like in the mountains, and you don't know what weather's coming up, and you've been out there for a few days, and a storm hits, you can get into some serious trouble very quickly. So I would say that off-trailing's really good. I love off-trail hikes. I designed most of my routes to include that. But first, make sure that you kind of have that stuff in line as far as navigation, fitness level, and a backup plan for being able to extract yourself. Not that you should depend on the InReach, because it might not work. Always just depend on yourself over everything and don't expect anybody to bail you out. But what I would do is I would pick some spots in your area and go on Cal Topo. Let me see if I can pull this up. Actually, no, I'm not going to pull it up. But go on Cal Topo, and within Cal Topo, you can use something called slope angle shading. And slope angle shading lets you see the slope of the landscape. So it actually puts this layer over the topo map, and it will show you red to green variation, and you can see what areas are really steep or what areas are more shallow that you could hike up through. Then over time, you'll also learn from looking at topo maps and correlating it to what you're doing in the field, where good places to hike off trail are. So just slowly ease your way into it. Do experiments where you're doing it without a big pack or a big trip plan, so you don't feel like you have to push yourself into dangerous scenarios. And then slowly increase the level of intensity until you can spend a lot of time off trail and until you're really good at navigating. But I would say the best thing for anybody to do, unless you're already very advanced at navigating, is just to practice your off-trail navigation like crazy. Because when you're by yourself and you go out and you actually get lost, you're going to second guess yourself so much, and you're going to have a really bad time if you're not an absolute expert at off-trail navigation. So those are a few tips I could give you. Just slowly ease your way into it and go from there. Let's see if we have any other questions in here. Let's see what we got. Come on, guys, send me some questions here. Oh, here's one. Do you use a bear canister? If you guys have any kind of questions, leave them here. I'll answer them for a few more minutes, and then I have a long trail run to do today. It was pouring rain and freezing rain earlier, and my girlfriend just got back from trail running, and she could barely make it in the door because her hands were frozen. So I was preparing for this live stream, so I lucked out, and my hands aren't frozen yet. Bear container. All right. So I don't use bear containers. I absolutely hate them. If anybody doesn't know what a bear container is, it's just a big plastic container where you keep food. And it's supposed to keep bears away, which it probably does. But it also is very heavy and it makes your backpack very uncomfortable. And I just don't find it to be a great solution because you can't pack that much food in it. You might get 8 days of food in it, which is fine for some trips. I use these things called Sacks. It's just a Kevlar sack. And I have 2 of them because a lot of times I will cache food. It's just URSACK or something. You can just Google like that with bear in Google and it'll pop up for you. But what I like to use with those is scent-proof Ziploc bags inside. And by combining both of those, they work really well. Now, it may or may not work better than a bear container, but the key here is you have to be very good with keeping a clean camp without food around it. And you also have to be good at knowing the animals that you might come in contact with that area. Now, most of the places I go backpacking in the lower 48 have black bears, brown bears, probably have some coyotes. You got some mountain lions. Mountain lions are never going to come steal your food if you're around. They're going to stay away from you. Bears are never going to come steal your food if you're around, unless you're close to trailheads where there's a lot of people and they're just tame, which is a different situation. But out in the backcountry, what I do is, you guys can do this on your own. Everything you do in the backcountry is on you. But if I'm not in grizzly bear territory, I sleep with my food in my tent by my head. Like I said, you guys can do whatever you want. There's lots of really good adventurers and backpackers that do the same thing. One of the most prolific backpackers, Andrew Skirka, I believe, does this. He's put up some of the most ridiculous backpacking and, I guess you could say, outdoor adventure routes of anybody to ever walk the earth. You can check him out, AndrewSkurka. But I don't believe he uses a bear can. But you just have to be very selective in keeping your camp clean. And when you're actually out in the wilderness, you're not going to have a bear just come up to you. Most bears are just terrified. And if it does come up to you, you also have to be trained in what to do if a bear is near you. So what I always tell people, anytime you're going to go out with wild animals, you need to have ingrained into your muscle memory the actual step-by-step process that you do if you come in contact with that animal. If it's not ingrained into your muscle memory and you haven't practiced it before the trip and practiced it many times, you're not going to remember to do it when the animal comes. So I don't use bear cans, but it's on you if you would like to use them or not. And some places have requirements where you have to take the bear can. So if there's a requirement, you got to decide if you're going to go there, if you want to use a bear can. I just stay out of those places because I don't want to carry a bear can around with me just because it's really a pain. So that's my answer. There's lots of different opinions on this. I've never had a problem with it, but I also am always taking all accountability onto my shoulders if something happens to me. And I think that's the essential technique in the backcountry. So hopefully that helps you out. Check out Andrew Skirka's website on the bear containers. I think he wrote a blog post on this, on how over the years his methodology has changed for bears. As far as food, when there's grizzly bears in grizzly bear territory, I don't keep food in my tent or anywhere near me in grizzly bear territory. It's a completely different thing. So when you're with the grizzlies, you are definitely not the top of the food chain anymore. And you need to acquire the skills of where to store food so they can't smell it in the first place, where to use the bathroom so they can't smell it, where to eat so they can't smell it, and have the whole process down of how to space those apart from each other so the bear also won't find where your camp is. So that kind of turns the level of intensity up even more, but it doesn't really keep me out of grizzly areas because there's some awesome wilderness with grizzlies in them. So hopefully that helps you out. All right, one more question and then I got to run, guys. So this one says, I've been watching some of the Photoshop editing videos with smart objects. Can a smart object only be used with camera raw? So for anybody that doesn't know what a smart object is, within Camera Raw and Photoshop, you can actually edit your raw file. Then you can jump into Photoshop And instead of just making a layer that's compressed, Photoshop allows you to jump back into Camera Raw for each of those layers. So what I do with most of my shots is I will expose for the highlights using my expose to the right technique, which is in my other videos. And once you're exposed for the highlights, I hardly ever bracket shots anymore because you can edit one shot in Camera Raw and then you can edit for the highlights. If you need to pull out the darks, you can just duplicate that layer as another smart object and then open it back up in Camera Raw and just brighten the exposure up, and you'll have all this dark detail from that exposed to the right technique. And using that, you can just blend these two together using luminosity mask and standard hand blended techniques in Photoshop. And you don't really need all these bracketed raw files because you can just work on one raw file so long as you have all the dark detail collected using exposed to the right. So as far as working with smart objects in Camera Raw, yeah, you can always use them in Camera Raw. You can use them in Photoshop, but what it does is it gives you the ability to jump back and forth between without any loss. So if you decide that you make a raw editing error, once you're over in Photoshop, you can just double click the layer again and you're back in Camera Raw where you can edit it again. And this is the main reason that I don't edit photos in Adobe Lightroom. I use Lightroom as a catalog where I organize and keep all my photos, both raw files and portfolio. But I do all my editing in Camera Raw because Lightroom and Camera Raw have the same processing ability. It's essentially the same program with a slightly different interface. But Camera Raw lets you jump back and forth really easily between Photoshop and Camera Raw. And it just makes it an awesome editing experience because it's never like you can't go back and fix something that you made a mistake with. So hopefully that helps to answer your question. All right. Well, we are at what? 51 minutes. So I think I'm done for the day. If I keep talking, I won't be clear and concise and I'll start to ramble even more than I already have. But I really hope you guys enjoyed that. Make sure to leave a like under the video. Sign up for my email list if you want to get notifications when I put out new content. And I'll leave a link for that email list under this video. And then subscribe to my channel if you want to see more, guys. Make sure to let me know in the comments if you guys like this kind of video, and I'll keep doing them. So thanks again for being here. I really appreciate you all. It's fun to sit down and do this, and I couldn't do it without you. See you next time, guys.